The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Windsor as Sarah Thompson hurried toward the local community center. Her weathered hands clutched a worn envelope containing the electricity bill she could no longer afford to pay. At 68, Sarah had never imagined she would find herself choosing between heating her small flat or buying groceries for the week. Sarah had lived in Windsor her entire life. She remembered when the streets were quieter, when neighbors knew each other by name, and when her late husband James was still by her side. James had worked at the castle grounds for 30 years as a gardener, taking pride in maintaining the beautiful gardens that tourists admired from afar. When he passed away 2 years ago from cancer, Sarah's world crumbled. The medical bills had drained their savings, and her modest pension barely covered the rising costs of living. The community center buzzed with activity as Sarah entered. Volunteers moved about with purpose, organizing donations of food and clothing for families struggling to make ends meet. Sarah felt a familiar pang of embarrassment as she approached the reception desk. She had always been the one helping others, not the one seeking help. "Mrs. Thompson," called out Margaret Wilson, the center coordinator. "How lovely to see you. Are you here to volunteer today?" Sarah's cheeks flushed red. "Actually, I was wondering if you might have any information about assistance programs. Things have been rather difficult since James passed." Margaret's expression softened immediately. She had known Sarah for years and understood how difficult it must have been for her to ask for help. "Of course, dear. Let me get you some information. We have several programs that might be helpful." As they spoke in hushed tones, neither woman noticed the quiet figure observing from across the room. Prince William had arrived at the community center for what was supposed to be a brief, informal visit. He often made unannounced stops at local organizations to better understand the challenges facing his future subjects. Today, he had come alone, dressed simply in dark jeans and a navy sweater, hoping to blend in with the volunteers. William watched as Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief when Margaret handed her a packet of information. He could see the dignity in the elderly woman's posture, even as she struggled with her circumstances. Something about her reminded him of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, in her determination to maintain grace under pressure. "That's Mrs. Thompson," whispered one of the volunteers who recognized the prince. "Her husband used to work at the castle. Wonderful man, James was. They've been having a terrible time since he died." William's heart tightened. He knew that behind every statistic about poverty and hardship was a real person with a real story. Sarah represented thousands of elderly people across Britain who were struggling in silence, too proud to ask for help until they had no other choice. As Sarah prepared to leave, clutching her packet of information like a lifeline, William made a decision that would change everything. He approached Margaret Wilson quietly. "The lady who just left," he said softly, ensuring his voice wouldn't carry. "Mrs. Thompson. Can you tell me more about her situation?" Margaret looked surprised, but quickly composed herself. She had worked with various members of the royal family on charitable initiatives before and understood the importance of discretion. "She's a remarkable woman, Your Royal Highness. Her husband James worked on the castle grounds for decades. Since his passing, she's been struggling terribly, too proud to ask for help until now. She's facing eviction if she can't pay her bills." William nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to help, but it needs to be done carefully. She mustn't know it comes from me. Can you arrange that?" "Of course, sir. We have anonymous donor programs." That evening, William returned to Kensington Palace with Sarah's story weighing heavily on his mind. He found Catherine in their sitting room, helping Prince George with his homework while Princess Charlotte played nearby with her dolls. "You look troubled," Catherine observed, setting down George's mathematics book. She had learned to read her husband's expressions over the years of their marriage. William sat beside her and recounted his encounter at the community center. Catherine listened intently, her own heart moved by Sarah's plight. "There are so many people like her," Catherine said quietly. "Invisible struggles happening right under our noses." "That's exactly what bothers me," William replied. "We live in this bubble sometimes, surrounded by protocol and ceremony, while real people face real hardship just miles from our home." Catherine reached for his hand. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to help her. But more than that, I want to understand. I want to see how we can make a real difference, not just write a check and move on." Over the next few days, William couldn't shake the image of Sarah's dignified struggle. He found himself thinking about her during official engagements, wondering if she had managed to pay her bills, if she was eating properly, if she felt forgotten by a society that had moved past her generation's contributions. Meanwhile, Sarah received unexpected news. Margaret Wilson called to inform her that an anonymous donor had covered her outstanding bills and provided funds for groceries and heating for the next several months. "I don't understand," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she sat in her small kitchen. "Who would do such a thing?" "Sometimes angels come in unexpected forms," Margaret replied gently. "The donor only asks that you know you're not forgotten and that your late husband's service to the community was appreciated." Sarah spent that night looking at old photographs of James in his work clothes, tending to the castle gardens he loved so much. She wondered if somehow, from wherever he was, he had arranged for this miracle. But this was only the beginning of something much larger. William's encounter with Sarah had planted a seed that would grow into something that would touch the entire nation. As he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he knew that one quiet gesture was not enough. He and Catherine needed to do more, to be more than just symbols in beautiful clothes cutting ribbons at ceremonies. The next morning brought news that would set everything in motion. William's private secretary informed him that several media outlets were planning stories about rising poverty among the elderly in Britain. The timing seemed like more than coincidence. "Perhaps," William said to Catherine over breakfast, "it's time we did something that really mattered." 3 weeks after their first encounter with Sarah's story, William and Catherine found themselves walking through the narrow streets of Manchester on a cold February morning. They had traded their usual royal entourage for a small, discreet security detail and worn their most casual clothes. This was not an official engagement that would appear in the court circular. This was something entirely different. The couple had spent those 3 weeks quietly visiting community centers, food banks, and elderly care facilities across Britain. What they discovered broke their hearts and strengthened their resolve. Sarah Thompson was not unique. There were thousands of elderly people living in similar circumstances, choosing between heating and eating, medication and rent, dignity and survival. In Manchester, they met Harold Peters, an 82-year-old former factory worker who had served in the Falklands War. Harold lived alone in a one-bedroom flat where the heating had been broken for 6 months. He wrapped himself in blankets his late wife had knitted and ate 1 meal a day to stretch his pension. "I don't want to be a burden," Harold told them, unaware of who they were. He thought they were volunteers from a local charity. "I've worked my whole life, served my country. I just want to keep my independence." Catherine felt tears sting her eyes as she listened to Harold's story. He showed them photographs of his military service and his wedding day, his voice breaking as he spoke about his wife who had died the previous year. "She would have hated seeing me like this," he whispered. "Always said I was too proud for my own good." That afternoon, William and Catherine visited a community kitchen in Birmingham, where elderly residents gathered for their only hot meal of the day. They sat with Mary O'Connor, a retired nurse who had spent 40 years caring for others in the National Health Service. "I never thought I'd be on this side of things," Mary confided as she carefully ate her soup, making it last. I used to care for patients, and now I can barely care for myself." The stories accumulated like weights on their hearts. Veterans who had served their country with honor, teachers who had educated generations of children, nurses who had saved countless lives, all struggling in their final years with the basic necessities of life. But it was their return visit to Sarah Thompson that crystallized their mission. They found her in her small flat, which was now warm and well lit thanks to the anonymous donation. She was knitting scarves for the community center, giving back even as she had received help. "I know someone helped me," she told Margaret Wilson as the royal couple listened from the next room. "I just wish I could thank them properly. You know, my James always said that kindness was like a circle. It comes back to you somehow." Sarah's words hit William like a revelation. She wasn't just grateful for the help she had received. She was actively looking for ways to give back, to complete the circle of kindness that had rescued her from despair. That evening, back at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine sat with their children during dinner. Prince George, now 11, noticed his parents' unusual quietness. "You look sad, Papa," he observed with the directness of childhood. William exchanged glances with Catherine before answering. "We've been meeting some very special people who are having difficult times. It makes us think about how we can help." Princess Charlotte, 9 years old and already showing signs of her mother's empathy, set down her fork. "Like when we help at Christmas with the presents for children?" "Similar, but different," Catherine explained gently. "These are older people who worked very hard their whole lives, but now need help with basic things like staying warm and having enough food." Prince Louis, the youngest at 6, piped up with characteristic innocence. "Can't we just invite them to live here? This house is very big." The adult smiled at his sweet simplicity, but his words sparked something in William's mind. While they couldn't invite everyone to live at the palace, perhaps there was a way to bring more personal connection to their charitable work. Over the following weeks, William and Catherine developed what they privately called the Circle Project. It wasn't about grand gestures or media attention. It was about creating genuine connections between those who could help and those who needed support. They began by quietly reaching out to other families in their social circle, sharing the stories they had heard without revealing names or specific details. The response was overwhelming. Friends, colleagues, and even staff members wanted to help in meaningful ways. Lady Pemberton, a family friend, immediately offered to adopt Harold Peters as her surrogate grandfather, ensuring he had regular visits, home-cooked meals, and assistance with repairs to his flat. She had lost her own grandfather the previous year and found healing in caring for someone else. The Duke of Marlborough's family connected with Mary O'Connor, the retired nurse. They not only provided financial support, but also invited her to family gatherings, recognizing that loneliness was often more devastating than poverty. But William and Catherine wanted to do more than facilitate connections between their wealthy friends and struggling elderly people. They wanted to create a model that ordinary families could follow, a way for communities to naturally support their most vulnerable members. They began visiting middle-class neighborhoods, attending community meetings, and speaking with local leaders about grassroots support networks. In these meetings, they didn't reveal their royal identity, introducing themselves simply as William and Catherine, concerned citizens who wanted to make a difference. In Nottingham, they met with a group of young families who had started a program where children adopted elderly neighbors, visiting regularly to chat, help with shopping, or simply provide companionship. The program had started when 8-year-old Emma Watson noticed that the old man next door never had visitors. "Emma just started talking to Mr. Jenkins over the fence," explained her mother, Susan. "Before we knew it, she was visiting him every day after school. It made such a difference to both of them." Mr. Jenkins, a widower in his 70s, had become like an additional grandfather to Emma and her younger brother. In return for their companionship, he helped Emma with her mathematics homework and taught both children about gardening. "It's not charity," Susan emphasized. "It's community. It's what neighborhoods used to be like when my grandmother was young." This was exactly what William and Catherine had been searching for. Not programs that created dependency, but relationships that created mutual benefit. Children learning from elder wisdom while providing energy and joy to lonely seniors. Families gaining perspective on their own blessings while offering practical support to those who needed it. They documented these grassroots initiatives, learning from ordinary people who had found extraordinary ways to care for each other. In Leeds, they discovered a program where teenagers taught elderly residents how to use smartphones and video calling, connecting them with distant family members. In Plymouth, they found a community garden where young mothers and elderly residents worked side by side, sharing both the labor and the harvest. Each visit reinforced their growing conviction that the solution to elderly poverty and isolation wasn't just about money or government programs. It was about rebuilding the social connections that had been eroded by modern life's pace and priorities. But they also recognized that their unique position could amplify these grassroots efforts in ways that ordinary citizens couldn't. As they planned their next steps, they knew they were approaching a moment that would require them to step out of the shadows and into the public eye. The question was how to do it in a way that honored the dignity of people like Sarah Thompson, Harold Peters, and Mary O'Connor, while inspiring a nation to rediscover the power of quiet, personal kindness. Their answer would come from an unexpected source and would indeed move the entire nation to tears. But first, they had one more person to visit. One more story that would complete their understanding of what needed to be done. The letter arrived at Kensington Palace on a Thursday morning in March, written in careful cursive on cream-colored paper that had clearly been saved for special occasions. William's private secretary almost set it aside with the hundreds of other pieces of correspondence that arrived daily. But something about the return address caught his attention. Windsor, Mrs. S. Thompson. "Sir," he said, entering William's study where the prince was reviewing briefing papers for an upcoming state dinner. "I believe this might interest you." William recognized the name immediately. Sarah Thompson, the elderly woman whose story had started everything. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. "Dear anonymous friend," the letter began. "I hope this letter finds its way to you somehow. Margaret Wilson at the community center told me that she couldn't give me your name or address, but she promised to try to get a letter to you. I wanted you to know that your kindness saved more than just my heating bills. You saved my hope. For months after my James died, I felt invisible, like the world had moved on and forgotten that I existed. Your help reminded me that I still mattered to someone. But I'm writing for another reason, too. I've been thinking about what you did for me, and I realized that there must be others like me, people who are struggling alone, too proud or too scared to ask for help. I've been volunteering at the community center every day now, and I've met so many people with stories like mine. Yesterday, I met a gentleman named Arthur Mills. He's 91 and a veteran of the Korean War. He's been eating dog food because it's cheaper than regular food, but he won't ask for help because he says he doesn't want to take resources away from families with children. I used some of the money you gave me to buy Arthur proper groceries for a week, but that's not enough. There are dozens like him, maybe hundreds in just our small community alone. I have an idea, but I need help to make it work. What if we could create a system where people could help each other quietly, without embarrassment or paperwork or long waiting lists? What if kindness could spread from person to person like ripples in a pond? I know I'm just an old woman who doesn't understand much about how the world works these days, but I believe that most people are good. They want to help. They just don't know how or who needs it. If you're still listening, anonymous friend, and if you have the power to make bigger changes than just helping one lonely widow, please consider this. The greatest gift you could give wouldn't be money. It would be showing people that every small act of kindness matters. I remain your grateful friend, Sarah Thompson P.S. I've enclosed a photograph of the scarf I knitted for you. Even though I don't know who you are, I wanted to make something with my own hands to say thank you. Inside the envelope was indeed a photograph of a beautifully knitted navy blue scarf with an intricate cable pattern. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of someone who had spent decades perfecting her skill. William stared at the letter for a long time, reading it twice more before calling for Catherine. When she arrived, he handed her the letter without a word. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she read Sarah's words. "She's describing exactly what we've been trying to create," she whispered. "She figured it out on her own." That afternoon, William and Catherine made a decision that would change everything. They drove to Windsor, not in an official car with flags and security details, but in William's personal vehicle with just 2 protection officers following at a distance. They found Sarah at the community center, organizing donated winter coats with the systematic efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime managing a household on a limited budget. She looked up as they approached, and William saw the exact moment when recognition dawned in her eyes. "Oh, my word," she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. We're your anonymous friends," Catherine said gently, sitting down beside Sarah on a worn wooden bench. "We received your letter." Sarah stared at them in shock, then looked around the busy community center where volunteers continued their work, oblivious to the royal presence among them. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why would you? How did you?" William leaned forward, his voice quiet and sincere. "Because you're right, Mrs. Thompson, about all of it, about kindness spreading like ripples in a pond, about people wanting to help but not knowing how, about the fact that small acts of kindness matter more than grand gestures." Over the next hour, they told Sarah about their journey over the past months, about Harold and Mary and all the others they had met, about the grassroots programs they had discovered, about their growing conviction that the solution to loneliness and poverty among the elderly lay not in government programs or royal patronages, but in rebuilt community connections. "We want to do what you suggested in your letter," Catherine explained. "Create a way for people to help each other quietly and directly. But we need someone to help us get it right, someone who understands what it's like to need help and to give it." Sarah listened with growing amazement as they outlined their vision. A national network of local community circles where people could connect across generational and economic lines. Not charity, but mutual support. Young families who could offer practical help in exchange for wisdom and companionship. Professional people who could provide services in exchange for skills like knitting, cooking, or gardening. "It would start small," William explained. "Just a few communities at first. We'd support it quietly at first, learning what works and what doesn't. Then, when we're ready, we'd like to invite the nation to join us," Catherine finished. "Not through a formal royal engagement or a charity gala, but through something more personal." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears and excitement. "What did you have in mind?" 3 weeks later, on a sunny April morning, something unprecedented appeared on the official social media accounts of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Instead of the usual formal photographs or announcement of royal engagements, there was a simple video shot in what appeared to be someone's living room. William and Catherine sat on a comfortable sofa, dressed casually, with no crowns or formal attire in sight. Between them sat Sarah Thompson, wearing the navy blue scarf from her photograph and looking nervous, but determined. "We'd like to tell you about someone who changed the way we think about kindness," William began, his voice warm and conversational rather than formal. "This is our friend Sarah." For the next 10 minutes, Sarah told her story in her own words. She spoke about losing James, about struggling to pay her bills, about the anonymous help that saved her from despair. She talked about meeting Arthur Mills and discovering how many elderly people were suffering in silence. I realized that the person who helped me gave me more than money, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. They gave me back my dignity and my purpose. They showed me that I still mattered. Catherine then spoke about their journey over the past months, about the communities they had visited and the programs they had discovered. She described families where teenagers taught elderly neighbors to use technology while learning traditional skills in return. She talked about community gardens where different generations worked side by side. We've learned that the solution isn't about the wealthy helping the poor, Catherine said. It's about all of us helping each other. It's about recognizing that everyone has something to offer and everyone sometimes needs support. William concluded by announcing the launch of the Circle of Kindness initiative. Starting immediately, they would support the creation of local community networks where people could connect across generational and economic lines. The program would be funded through existing charitable foundations, but run entirely at the local level by volunteers. We're not asking you to donate money, William emphasized. We're asking you to look around your own community and see who might need a friend. Maybe it's an elderly neighbor who could use help with shopping. Maybe it's a young mother who could use an experienced grandmother figure. Maybe it's a teenager who could benefit from learning life skills from someone who's lived them. The video ended with Sarah making one final appeal. Kindness doesn't have to be grand or expensive, she said. Sometimes the smallest gesture can save someone's whole world. I know because it saved mine. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the video's release, social media was flooded with stories of people reaching out to elderly neighbors they had never spoken to. Community centers reported a surge in volunteers. Local newspapers published stories about intergenerational programs starting spontaneously in neighborhoods across Britain. But the most powerful responses came from elderly people themselves. Letters and emails poured in from seniors who had felt invisible and forgotten, expressing gratitude that someone had finally noticed their struggles. Veterans wrote about feeling valued again. Retired teachers offered to tutor children whose families couldn't afford help. Former nurses volunteered to provide health education in their communities. The program that had started with William's chance encounter with Sarah Thompson in a Windsor community center had become a national movement within weeks. Media outlets around the world picked up the story, praising the royal couple for choosing substance over ceremony, for addressing real problems with practical solutions. But for William and Catherine, the most meaningful response came in a letter that arrived a month later, again written in careful cursive on cream-colored paper. Dear William and Catherine, Sarah wrote. She had asked permission to use their names after their public collaboration. I wanted you to know that Arthur Mills had his first home-cooked Sunday dinner in 2 years yesterday. The Morrison family from down the street invited him, and he's teaching their twin boys how to whittle. Mrs. Morrison says Arthur reminds her of her grandfather, and Arthur told me it feels wonderful to be needed again. The circle of kindness has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. Our little community center now hosts 3 intergenerational programs, and the waiting list to participate is longer than our list of people needing help. But the most beautiful thing has happened. We don't need anonymous donors anymore because neighbors are taking care of neighbors. The circle has closed, and kindness is flowing in all directions. Thank you for listening to an old woman's letter and for believing that small acts of kindness could change the world. You didn't just help me, you helped me help others, and that has made all the difference. Your grateful friend always, Sarah P.S. I've enclosed a photograph of Arthur and the Morrison boys with their whittling projects. I thought you might like to see the faces of the circle you helped create. As Catherine wiped away tears reading Sarah's letter, William reflected on how their understanding of royal duty had evolved. They had learned that the most powerful thing they could offer wasn't their titles or their formal positions, but their ability to listen, to connect, and to inspire others to recognize the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness. The quiet gesture that had started with helping one elderly woman pay her heating bill had grown into a national movement that reconnected communities, bridged generational divides, and reminded an entire nation that in a world often focused on grand gestures and dramatic changes, sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply caring for the person next door. And in living rooms across Britain, elderly people were no longer eating alone. Young families were learning traditional skills from experienced neighbors, and the circle of kindness continued to grow, one small act at a time.